Welcome to Rauta. This video is done in commercial collaboration with our sponsor, Steelfest. Buongiorno and welcome to Italian Take on Metal. And this one is a really interesting band. It's called Dramanduhr. I don't even know how to pronounce it, but let's go with the flow. And what makes this Tramohr debut album so interesting is that this is a one-man project and something that is not very easy to box in any given genre. Some say it's some kind of avant-garde-ish take, some say more progressive metal, and basically this could be put into one of those boxes. One could even say this is melodic metal done with somewhat progressive and avant-garde-ish elements. But what makes this band and the album so interesting is that this is done with made-up language, it seems, made by the band itself. And here we have the debut album, which is indeed made of these elements. Something of a language, some kind of a language that isn't exactly your own language. I mean, if I really started to read this language, I would understand shit. I don't know, understand why these lyrics are even pronounced. First of all, even this might be from Italy. This is this doesn't sound Italian at all. Actually, this is something like Esperanto in the sense that it sounds familiar, bits and pieces here and there, but you really can't put your finger on it because it's really a made-up thing. So it's kind of interesting that there are these lyrics which then again are totally made up. One could even make a joke that this kind of a hipster approach to music is more like Italian version of Immortal and Blashherk mythology, but at least they use English language for the thing. Now, I don't judge. I mean, I am a fantasy geek in a way, so I kind of can understand why people want to do this. I mean, without this kind of a wild imagination and things like that, I think things like Game of Thrones or whatever Tolkien wrote with Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion and other things like Hobbit, they wouldn't exist. So you really need wild imagination to get things going. But given that a lot of metal people are actually quite much more conservative rather than what they would admit, I think this is going to get some kind of a judgment from people who are like saying, what is this shit? What is this madness? Why are you doing that? Why don't you sing in Italian or English like the rest of the world and all that stuff? Because then you would be just one of the other bands in the world. Now, be it as it may, this is the approach the band is doing, and it's of course up to the individual to judge or approach this like open mind and embracing the music here within. But of course what matters rather than the language in question is that is this music good? And that is a tricky one. Now, Dramanduhr is a project which is something like totally different. But that is not the whole truth because in fact, of course, the music follows rather safe paths. And calling this one avant-garde is maybe a little bit too much. I mean, if you really compare to bands like, say, even Death Spell Omega to this one, maybe actually more avant-garde than this one. Progressive then again is, I think, more approachable term or your usable one because this is indeed exactly that. This is melodic metal on the very core of the foundation of the album or the band, and the rest of the elements are somewhat avant-garde-ish here and there, but not going too far. I mean, this is not something that is like an artsy-fartsy David Lynch film project, and like after listening to the album, you're like, what the hell I just listened to? This is more like, yeah, the band is doing something different, but it's not like it's out of ordinary. More like there are parts where it kind of follows the rather usual structures and patterns of melodic metal. And you have cleaner parts of vocals and then more, what I would say in quotation marks, more extreme metal content. But it's not like one thing or another. It's more like blending these different styles together and trying to make sense with that. Now, there are lots of interesting ideas with the album. There are parts which are really, really soothing and kind of a beautiful and fun to listen to. But there are also parts where you just feel it's more like a filler, like this and that part of that song, you could just remove it out of the equation and it wouldn't hurt the album. Now, overall, I would say this is actually pretty decent of an album, but you kind of have to approach it with an open mind. Don't compare it to major subgenres of metal. Don't consider it to be melodic death metal or any kind of black metal, not to mention trash, doom, heavy, and all that stuff. It's just like one of those progressive metal albums, which is, having its limbs all around to various genres. It's more like a octopus with 8 tentacles pointing into different directions, and these directions are different subgenres. It's not as wild as this may sound, really, because the thing here is, while it's progressive and somewhat avant-garde-ish, there are still kind of moments when you just feel like, yeah, this is something I could learn to love, or at least like, because while it's a little bit wild and atypical release in so many ways, it's also familiar here and there. So melodic metal in the core, and it's more like the outsides are then again built with progressive metal and avant-garde-ish ideas, and that's the whole story of it. Now, given that this album is with 10 songs and not even 40 minutes, sometimes it feels like it's too much. So I don't know, maybe a little bit more streamlined version of this album would have been even better. Now it's more like work in progress, which is then again very typical for a lot of bands and projects with the first release out there. But this is already filled with a lot of skill and talent, so can't really bitch about it. At least it's something different. But I think this is not for everybody. For example, me, it's not very likely that I will come back to this album later on because it's not really the kind of a music I'm fond of, not big times anyway. But that being said, however, there are parts which I can really say are nice and all that stuff. It's just like I don't have notes to point out this and that second on the this and that track are the ones. So I'm just gonna call it, yeah, there are good parts, there are filler parts, and the result is, for me anyway, some kind of a 7 out of 10. So decent album, not exactly good yet, but way better than your mediocrity with very boring grey riffs and all. So this being said, this album being out since 2022 is out there for grabs, so go for your favorite streaming service or go for the physical product. It's out there, and of course you can then figure out whether or not this oddball is for you or not. Thanks for watching the review. Take